It often feels like the world of business is just chaos, right? A storm of startups, disruptions, and market crashes. But what if I told you that underneath all that noise, there's a hidden script, a set of powerful, predictable patterns that actually govern how industries rise and fall? And understanding that script, well, that's like seeing the future.
It's one of the biggest questions in business, isn't it? I mean, think about it. A company can be an absolute giant, on top of the world one decade, and then, poof, they're gone the next. So what happens? Is it just a string of bad luck, a few terrible decisions, or is there something much deeper going on?
Well, the thing is, it's not random at all. The evolution of a business, of an entire industry, actually follows a very predictable path. It's driven by what you could almost call social laws of commerce. And if you can learn to read this script, you can start to see what's coming around the corner.
Okay, so to really get this, we need to start with the engine that's driving all this change. And it all comes down to a fundamental tension, a kind of push and pull between two very different shapes, the exponential curve of technology and the S-shaped curve of an actual business.
Just take a look at this chart. It shows the absolutely relentless march of technology. For more than 100 years, computing power has just been exploding exponentially. You can see the whole history here, from old-school electromechanical systems to vacuum tubes, transistors, and then into the age of integrated circuits. This is that classic, unstoppable wave we all know as Moore's Law.
Okay, so that raises a really interesting question, doesn't it? If the technology that everything is built on is getting exponentially better and cheaper, why don't businesses just ride that wave forever? Why doesn't every company grow exponentially?
And here is the catch. A business isn't built on the entire massive frontier of technology. Nope. It's built on one specific application of it. And any single product or business model follows its own path, what we call an S-curve. It starts out slow, then it hits a period of super fast growth, and then it levels off as it hits the limits of its market.
And you can see this play out perfectly right here. This table lists the top semiconductor companies over the decades. The big dogs of the vacuum tube era, like RCA, were completely dethroned by the transistor kings, who then got left in the dust by the integrated circuit giants like Intel. Every time a new S-curve begins, it's like the whole game board gets reset, and usually the old winners are just too invested in what made them successful to jump to the next big thing.
All right, let's build on that. The second big piece of the puzzle is how a company's whole focus, its entire reason for being, begins to shift in a very predictable way as it moves along its own S-curve.
This graph right here tells a really important story. Early on, when an industry is new, all the innovation, that top curve, is about the product itself. Companies are just throwing stuff at the wall, trying to figure out what people actually want. But then a dominant design emerges. Think about how the iPhone basically set the blueprint for all smartphones. Once that happens, the game completely flips. Innovation in the product itself slows way down, and all the energy shifts to process innovation, that's the bottom curve, which is all about making that winning product cheaper and more efficient.
So you can really think of this in three distinct phases. First, you have the fluid phase. This is pure experimentation, the Wild West. Think of the early days of the personal computer. Then comes the transitional phase. This is where a winner emerges, like the IBM PC, and sets the standard. And finally, you enter the consolidated phase, where the battle isn't about new features anymore. It's all about optimizing your supply chain and driving down costs. Okay, so while all this is happening inside the company, that shift from product to process, something just as dramatic is happening outside, in the market, with your customers.
The best way to picture this is to think of a potential market like a giant, empty bucket. So, for example, back in 1993, the bucket for cell phones in Argentina was pretty much empty. You had 34 million potential customers, and almost nobody had a phone yet.
And what that does is it creates two completely different games. At the beginning, when the bucket is empty, it's a race. Companies are just scrambling to sign up all those eager, first-time buyers. But once that bucket is full, the game changes. It becomes a fight. There are no new customers left to grab, so the only way you can grow is by stealing them from your competition.
And you can see that exact shift happening in this graph. The curve shows how the market goes from being all about nuevos, that's your new buyers, to being almost entirely about recompra, people repurchasing or replacing what they already have. Your whole customer base changes, and that means your entire strategy has to change with it.
So we've got the tech, the innovation, and the market all evolving. But how does this all actually hit the wallet? Let's follow the money and see how this impacts a company's financials.
Really, it's just a simple chain of cause and effect. As the market gets full, there are fewer new customers to go around.
That leads to a much bigger fight for the customers that are already there. And when companies go to war, what's the first weapon they usually pull out? Price. So, inevitably, average prices start to fall.
But at the very same time, another force is pushing in the opposite direction. Remember that big shift to process innovation? That, plus the massive economies of scale you get from serving a huge market, means your average cost to make each item is also going down.
And boom, this one graph puts it all together. It's the whole financial story of an industry in one picture. That blue line, Ventus, or sales, follows that perfect S-curve we've been talking about. But look at the other two lines. Precio, price, in orange, and costo, cost, in green, are both on the steady downward slide. And the gap between them? That's your profit margin, and it's getting squeezed from both sides.
Okay, so let's tie all these threads together now. The S-curve, the innovation shift, that race turning into a fight, and the financial squeeze, and see what big picture emerges.
You know, this whole complicated journey really boils down to 3 clear stages, which you can see laid out here. It all starts with the emergent, or entrepreneurial stage, which is kicked off by some radical new idea. If that succeeds, it moves into the development stage, where a solid business model appears and it's a flat-out race to scale up. And finally, the industry hits maturity, where the market is full, growth slows to a crawl, and the game becomes all about fighting to keep the customers you have.
So think of it like this. The emergent stage is all about searching for a product that works. The development stage is a race to scale that product for a market that can't get enough of it. And the maturity stage is a long, hard fight to defend your territory in a crowded market where every percentage point of margin counts.
Once you understand this framework, it's like having a map. It lets you figure out exactly where you are and, maybe more importantly, anticipate what's just over the horizon. So, the question I want to leave you with is this. Where does your company, or your entire industry, sit on this curve today? And are you ready for the next S-curve? Because it's coming, and it's going to reset the entire game all over again.